I've heard a lot of, in speaking with students, a lot of them keep going back to the teachers, how they're treated by the teachers, the protocols, unofficial protocols that seem to be implemented for them versus their white counterparts. What do you think that's a symptom of, or what do you think that could be attributed to?
Well, I'm not going to talk about my opinion. I'm going to talk about the research. There's 30 years of research on school discipline, and that national research shows that the issues that surround the school to prison pipeline, this idea of overly punitive and disproportionate suspensions for African Americans, and most especially African American males, it's directly related to race. Even when you control for poverty, even when you say, like, for example, in my district, 75% almost of the students live at, or actually live below the poverty line. So pretty much every student, is living in these same conditions. The question becomes, how, so we've already pretty much controlled for poverty. So when you see kids, the research shows that when you control for poverty, still African American students have this disproportionate suspension. Even I love in Carmel, Indiana. If you're not familiar with that space, it's a very affluent community. And I was at a workshop one time, and someone from there was talking about the data in that district, and they said I believe it was for African Americans, the average household income was somewhere around $120,000, $130,000 a year. And still in that district where you don't have children coming from poverty, that it's the black students that get the overly punitive discipline. It's the black students. And the data show that it's not that, because the first thing people want to say is, well, if the black students are getting suspended, then they must be misbehaving more. And actually, again, the national data disproves that. The national data show that black students and white students actually have the same behavior, but black students often get punished more harshly for the same things. The national data actually shows that white students are suspended for things like smoking, vandalism, profanity. Black students are often suspended for things like insubordination, defiance, overly loud, which I think is interesting. And so when you look at those two lists, and this is part of the work that we do with the corporation, I think, but when you look at those two lists, what do you see the difference? Is that white students are being suspended for things that are very concrete. You had the cigarette or you didn't. You wrote on that desk or you didn't. You cussed me out or you didn't. Versus insubordination, threats, defiance. Those things are much more subjective. And now the work that we do in the corporation and working with teachers, I do a lot of teacher professional development, and we look at data and we talk about these things and we look at issues of cultural competency. And I have to say, as many times as we presented those two lists, teachers always hit that right on the nose. They're like, oh, this list is subjective, this list is objective, and what does that mean? And it sparks a rich conversation around implicit bias, around what are the things that maybe we can do differently. One time, a teacher raised her hand when looking at lists and said, what do you see? One time a teacher raised her hand and said, the things that black children are getting suspended for are about relationships. And I thought, that's powerful. That's exactly right. So, I felt intimidated. I felt threatened. I felt like you were being defiant to me. You disrespected me by being defiant. So what would it mean if we could build relationships between teachers and students, help teachers and students connect beyond, across all of this difference that happens? What we see in our district and many districts these days is that as we have this growing student body of color, we have more and more white teachers, or fewer teachers of color. So I think in our district it's somewhere around 90% of the teachers are white, and only 34, 32% of the student body is white. And so that means something. But it doesn't always mean what we think it means. because I think one of the things that I found most surprising, and probably for me the most difficult, is that when you look at the numbers, and the data bears this out nationally as well, the students who are in buildings with administrators of color, or the buildings who have administrators of color, actually have a higher disproportionality. So black students, students of color, black students in South Bend, get suspended more and get more harsher punishments. And so it's a very interesting dynamic. And what does that mean? Why does that happen? That again is part of the political and dynamics of education. Because when you have a student body of color, and you have administrators of color, and you have predominantly white teachers, what happens is that the teachers who are maybe having some difficulty relating to the students might refer kids, black students, more frequently. And then they're looking at the administrator of color, and there's a tremendous amount of pressure to make sure, as an administrator, that you don't look like you're playing favorites. Oh, you're just being nice because they're black. You're not really coming down on them. And so there's all those dynamics that I think would be great for really rich conversations in schools about how we interact with kids, how we interact with each other. How can we make decisions that's in the best interest of children, not just in the best interest of the teachers or influenced by our fears and our assumptions about what's actually at play.